This slide's presentation covers basic information about prosthetic components. Individuals who have had a partial foot or toe amputation can use a custom molded insert like the one shown on the left-hand side of the slide. The purpose of these inserts is to fill in the missing area of the toe or foot, and they can often be used as part of an AFO because they're going to provide that extra support that that person needs to help maintain their balance. If an individual has had a cyme amputation, which is nothing more than an ankle disarticulation, that person can bear weight on the end of their residual limb. However, cosmesis is definitely an issue. As you can see, this kind of prosthetic doesn't look very much like a normal human limb. And donning and doffing can be difficult because the end of the residual limb is usually a bulbous kind of shape that is difficult to fit into the prosthesis. It also requires a very low profile foot, and the foot selection overall is limited. As you can see, nothing very fancy about the kind of foot that's appropriate for a person with a cyme amputation. Somebody's had a transtibial level amputation. The prosthetic that's available is shown on the left-hand side of the slide, where you have 3 individual components. The residual limb fits into the socket, which is shown at the top. Connecting the socket to the foot ankle assembly is something known as a pylon. And then finally, there is some sort of foot ankle assembly, and the type of foot ankle assembly that the person is eligible for is going to depend on their K level. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So this slide shows an individual walking, and walking is part of foot and ankle function where the person is going to need some shock absorption. They're going to have to accommodate for the normal triplanar motion that's involved with walking. You also have to think about the feet being used for stability. And finally, there's also the element of cosmesis. Let's go ahead and watch this video on foot and ankle function.
So, welcome back everybody. It's Dr. Ustall again. In today's segment of our educational series, we're going to talk about prosthetic feet. So, the foot choice is going to be important for many people because the performance of the foot, whether it tolerates more indoor or outdoor activity, whether it has motion to it, whether it provides a little bit of push that we call propulsion, will make a difference on whether you walk well or walk just okay. Almost anybody can walk on any foot, but to really optimize or maximize your function, we want to select the right foot. The challenge is there are 220 different prosthetic feet out there on the world market, and we have access to most of them. They are generally categorized into 4 different classifications, and that classification was established by Medicare 25 years ago. I, as the doctor, have to determine what category you belong to, and that will then give me some choices of what type of foot to select.
Now, moving on, I'd like to talk to you about individual prosthetic foot types. Each of these kinds of feet will be covered in the subsequent slides. So we're going to talk about satch feet, single axis, multi-axis, dynamic response, as well as microprocessor feet. Okay, as Dr. Ustall said in the video, the kind of foot that the person is eligible for is going to depend on their K level. And we talked about K levels last class, and just a quick review, K0, person is not eligible for a prosthetic. K1 and K2 are fixed cadence ambulators. They don't change their walking speed. K3 and K4, variable cadence. They can change their walking speed for both of them, and K4 is reserved for those high-level athletes. K1, patient has the ability or potential to use a prosthesis for transfers or ambulation on level surfaces with a fixed cadence. Okay, this is a typical household ambulator. If somebody is designated as K1 level by the AMP outcome measure that we talked about, they are eligible for two different kinds of feet, either a SACH foot or a single axis foot. SACH stands for solid ankle cushioned heel. You can see an example of a SACH foot shown on the right-hand side of the slide. Essentially, you have a rubber foot, so the foot itself is rubber, but the keel inside is a rigid piece, usually made of wood. Okay, the keel length is going to determine the amount of forefoot flexibility. So in other words, if you want a lot of forefoot flexibility, you'd want a shorter keel, and a longer keel is going to allow the bend to be less. Okay, there's also going to be a rubber heel, and that's going to help promote shock absorption. Here is a picture of what the SACH foot looks like. Okay, it has advantages that are listed here, and there are also disadvantages that are listed here. I'd like to stop talking and have you watch this video of Dr. Ustall talking about a SACH foot.
For the lowest level of patient that's only going to be walking around in their house on a level surface, that's basically what we call a category 1 patient. They can get a very simple, very lightweight, and yes, very inexpensive type of foot. Now that might be a simple one that is literally a wooden block covered in foam. Now you can't really see very much here, but if I show you a cutaway of this foot, you can see that it literally is a wooden block with a piece of foam. Now it doesn't mean it's a bad foot, but it's very light, it's very simple, and it's a very, very low maintenance. The front half of the foot has a little bit of bend to it because it's rubber, but the rest of it is basically just one solid block. Now, I'm not a big fan of this, but if you want lightweight and simple, then it works very nicely.
Now, moving on to the next kind of foot that's eligible to a K1 ambulator, and this would be a single axis foot. This kind of foot is shown in the picture on the right-hand side of the slide, and you can see it's just a single axis. It's typically used with transfemoral level amputations, rarely transtibial. It's very stable, allows up to 15 degrees of plantar flexion and between 5 and 7 degrees of dorsiflexion. And again, that axis is right here, allows the foot to plantar flex and dorsiflex just enough. An example of what that single axis foot looks like in a cosmetic shell. And again, there are advantages to single axis and some disadvantages. I'd like to stop talking for a minute and watch this single axis foot video.
For most of our patients that are going to be walking indoors, you're also allowed to go to what's called a single axis foot, a foot that pivots up and down in one direction. So if I put this foot on the floor, you can see how it tilts up and down. There are rubber bumpers in there that will determine how much it bends or how soft it is, but it's still very lightweight, very simple, and qualifies for a patient that's a level 1 that's going to walk indoors on a relatively flat surface.
Now moving on to K2 ambulation level. If you remember, the patient has the ability to be a limited community ambulator. Okay, they still have a fixed cadence, but they're a little bit higher level than a person who's K1. And the feet available for K2 level, an example of this foot is a multi-axis foot. Multi-axis foot is shown here on the right-hand side of the slide, and this type of foot provides motion in all 3 planes, so that you get that normal triplanar motion of walking. It also works well on uneven terrain, as opposed to being only in the household on flat surfaces. That person is going to be out in the community where the terrain isn't always perfectly level. It reduces shear forces and allows for rotation over the fixed foot, and it also has a lot of different bumpers for shock absorption. Advantages are listed here, as well as disadvantages of this multi-axis foot. For now, I'd just like to have you watch the video on this kind of foot.
Now, once you start to go outdoors, you encounter uneven terrain. Now all of a sudden there's going to be lumps and bumps, little hills and inclines, and now we have a couple of choices. There are what we call multi-axis feet, feet that will not just go up and down like the first ones we saw, but will tilt a little bit side to side and maybe even rotate a little bit. And multi-axis feet typically have a way of sort of bending in different directions. This particular foot has multiple rubber bumpers at the heel, here in the front half of the foot, around what's the ankle joint, to allow motion. That's going to go up and down, tilt a little bit, and even rotate a little bit. And that type of rotation is important for certain activities where you might plant your foot on the ground and twist a little bit. Simple things like tennis or golf. You're not necessarily doing a lot of running or jumping, but that multi-axial movement may be important to you.
Now I'd like to move on to feet available for K3 ambulator. And remember, this is a typical community ambulator. There are different kinds of feet available for both K3 and K4, and these are the dynamic response foot as well as the microprocessor foot. The dynamic response foot is shown in a picture on the right-hand side of the slide, and this is typically a flexible carbon fiber keel that helps dissipate energy. It results in a smoother gait overall with some degree of push-off and allows for variable cadence. And this is a perfect kind of foot for active community ambulators. The dynamic response feet, so the K3 version is shown at the top right hand side of the slide. The K4 version shown at the bottom. Remember, K4 are those individuals who are very physically active, or young adults who are very physically active. Advantages and disadvantages are listed on the left-hand side of the slide, but for now, let's watch this video on dynamic response feet.
Those categories are helpful, but to be honest, of the 220 prosthetic feet out there, 200 of them belong in one category, which is category 3, where we now allow patients to get what's called a carbon fiber or dynamic response foot. There are lots of different companies that make them, and each company makes a variety of designs. There's almost too many choices. You can see even from these 3 that are here, they're all carbon fiber, but they're set up a little bit differently. Sometimes they zigzag the carbon fiber. Sometimes they put multiple layers of carbon fiber, because for everyday walking you might use this sort of bottom portion, and if you try to run and jump, then the bottom portion bends a little bit and you start using the second piece. So what do I mean by this dynamic response? Let me give you a quick demonstration so you can understand. If we look at this prosthetic foot, you can see it has a carbon fiber strut that comes down across here. The one in the heel is much thinner, so when the foot hits the ground, it bends. And more importantly, it bends when it comes forward, and it gives you a little bit of bounce. So that as you walk, you bend the carbon fiber, and then it springs you forward. That's what dynamic response is. These are still very lightweight, but becoming very expensive type of feet. Now we are spending in excess of $1,000, $2,000, even up to $10,000 for just the prosthetic foot. And they do come in a variety of configurations. They allow for different height. They allow for different activity levels, for running and jumping. They allow for different weight categories, typically up to 300 to 400 pounds if necessary. Now, the yellow one that's here is a fiberglass composite. Fiberglass has the same type of characteristics as carbon fiber. It bends, it springs back. It actually has a little bit smoother kind of bending motion. So you'll see in the near future that more and more prosthetic feet become fiberglass composite instead of the carbon fiber. Now, we have other categories of prosthetic feet too. So basically, the category 1, category 2, category 3 feet are what would cover most people. Now, there is a category 4. It is a very high performance type of category, typically for sports, recreational activities, and work. As you have seen, some of the people that run on TV have a sprinting type of foot that may have this long carbon strut, but no heel plate at all. So category 4 is for those high-level sports or activity-specific type of feet.
In addition to just the basic dynamic response foot, there is also something known as a multi-axis dynamic response foot, And again, this is just for the variable cadence users. Disadvantages are it's relatively expensive and it requires higher maintenance, but it's really good for high-level activities. Essentially, it just combines the advantage of the dynamic response foot and the multi-axis foot. This video shows a dynamic response multi-axis foot in process. And finally, another foot that's available to both K3 and K4 ambulators is known as the microprocessor foot. An example picture known as the proprio foot is shown on the right-hand side of the slide. And it actually has a microprocessor built right into the foot, and it's really good for unlevel surfaces. It has an adjustable heel height in case you want to change the height of your shoes. It has a sitting mode. It promotes sit to stand that's symmetrical, and if the person is sitting down, it can recognize this and helps to keep the foot looking very natural. It also sits with dorsiflexion during gait and on steps. One big disadvantage is it's very heavy. This is a video of this person using the microprocessor foot.
My name is Annemiek Jansen. I'm from Holland and I was born with a defect on my right underleg. So in 2008 there was a decision to amputate, and I was on many prostheses after that, and I tried several foots, but they weren't comparing with what I'm doing. I work in a practice for physiotherapy and in a practice with veterinarians, and it's walking, standing, and someday I got a call from my prosthetist and there was a new product, and I was very skeptical because it was a foot and I had several foots but they wouldn't serve. So I made an appointment and the foot was placed under my prosthesis, and already the first steps were amazing. Walking on ramps, walking on stairs, just walking on high heels, it was really a difference with all my other foots. Now I can walk my dog without standing still or having pain in my stump, walking on high heels, sitting on a chair because it has a relax mode. It's really an amazing foot and it worked for me. It changed my way of living. The proprio foot is the first foot that walks with me, so it really changed my life, and I hope it can change yours too.